This story is called Crying in the Night, and it's from The Two-Tailed Snake. There are times Joya hears her mother weeping at night. Everyone should be asleep, Joya thinks, as indeed I should be. She pushes the needle through cloth, imagines her father at the door, watching, approving. She snips the thread, holds still, listening for the sound again, but it's gone. Perhaps it's a wild animal. She remembers a story her mother used to tell. It was one that Joya's grandfather, Dadu, had told Ma and her sister Tiyamashi when they were little. He'd told it to them when they were frightened by sounds after dark. Though Joya never questioned this when she was small, she wonders why parents would tell their children something so terrifying. Long ago, Dadu used to say, when civets, mongooses and jackals roamed freely around the villages of the far, far south, night animals made friends with children who couldn't sleep. They'd wait until adults had closed their doors, thinking their sons and daughters were slumbering, and then they would tap on the windows where the children waited. The civets would chitter. Papachi, 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 chi-chi-chi-chi. The mongooses would chatter. Ah-woo! Ah-woo! Ee-woo! The jackals would cry. Ma and Joya would make the animal noises over and over. Then they'd lie back laughing, only continuing when Joya's mother had composed herself. There was a boy called Biju, she'd say. His name meant jewel, and he was a precious child whom everyone loved. He had midnight black hair and eyes that sparkled like stars. Biju was the youngest of 7 brothers and sisters, and he was but 7 years old when this tale took place. Biju was a well-mannered boy who respected his elders and helped others whenever he could. He was closest to Anuradha, the youngest of his sisters. His parents loved Biju for his good deeds and sweet nature, but there was one thing about him they would have changed if they could. Biju would not sleep. After hours of lullabies, stories, and gentle backstroking, he'd close his eyes and fake sleep so his mother, father, or Anuradha would creep away to their chores or their own bed. The night animals came when the elders weren't listening. Chee-chee-chee-chee-chee-chee-chee, papu-chee, papu-chee, ah-woo! They tapped on his window. Biju would be ready, kurta over his head, chappals on his feet. He'd leap out to join his animal friends. They'd run to the jungle, jump into the river, swim its entire length and back, fly on the backs of night birds to the tops of mountains, and then return to the outskirts of the villages to climb the highest kodam trees and look down on a sleeping world. Biju would feast with the night animals, his belly so full of fruit and seed he could eat naught but a tiny morsel on his return. This continued until the child's eyelids grew thick for want of sleep, and still the cry of the night creatures lured Biju from his bed. Chee 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 chee, Papa chee, ah woo. The king of the jackals was known by the stout horn that sprouted from the middle of his forehead. At this point, Joya would interrupt her mother. But Ma, jackals don't have horns. Hush, child, her mother would say. This one did. The king, Ma continued, had heard of this boy. It was said he believed the child must be gifted with special powers, since he existed in both the world of men and the realm of night animals. The animals whispered among themselves that the king sought Biju, as he wanted him to be his heir. The Jackal King had no sons or daughters, and it was said he would take an heir from a different world. One night, a sharp tap came on Biju's window, followed by a cry that would have woken the dead had they been listening. Ah woo! Ee! Ee! Ew! Ooh! Biju turned to look at Anuradha with a heavy heart. He knew who had come for him, and he knew he wanted to go. His eyelids were so heavy from lack of sleep, he could barely make out the shapes of his siblings under the blankets in the faint moonlight. With one silent wave, he leapt out and joined the king. The following day, Ma continued, the whole village gathered outside Biju's home, where the boy's family wept because their jewel child was missing. How can we help? The villagers asked. Shall we organize search parties to comb the jungle? They looked for 7 days and nights, but not a trace of the boy was found. At this point in the story, Ma would always pause. Joya would pout and say, It can't end like that. She knew very well that it didn't end that way, but she still said it every time, just as Ma and Tiamashi had to Dadu years earlier. After what seemed like forever, Ma would continue. Years later, when Anuradha was grown up with children of her own, she'd hear a tapping on the windows after she put her children to bed. She'd rush outside to see who was there, but find no one. Sometimes she would hear a faint "Eeeeoo, woo" in the distance, and at other times she'd hear nothing but taps. One night, Anuradha lay waiting beside her youngest child, who was fast asleep. The night animals should leave sleeping children alone, she thought, and yet here was the tapping on the window. She crept out from under the mosquito net, tiptoed to the window. Yoo! Woo! The call was faint at first. Then again, Yoo! Woo! Anu Didi, is that you? In the moonlight, she saw a creature, half man, half jackal, with a horn in the centre of his head and eyes that shone like stars. "Biju?" she cried out. But when she looked again, the hybrid man-animal had disappeared. As a child, Joya had found the story intoxicating because of its mystery. Now she cries in the night at the cruelty of it. Thank you very much.